You are tuned into the Dr. Tyna Show with Dr. Tyna Moore. For more, visit drtyna.com. On this episode of the Dr. Tyna Show, I am sitting down with fellow naturopathic physician, Dr. Ben Lynch. If you don't know who Dr. Ben Lynch is, you need to. He is quite literally the GOAT when it comes to genetic variances and MTHFR mutations, which has become all the rage suddenly nowadays on the internet again. He was talking about these things 20 years ago. He's written the book on it, the book Dirty Genes. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to. The man is a mad genius. That's how I describe him. Every time I bring up his name to someone who doesn't know who he is, I follow it up with, and he's a mad genius, which is truly the only way to describe this man. He is so kind, he is so intelligent, and he is so well researched. And it was a real pleasure to finally get him on the show today. So join me on this episode as we learn more about MTHFR mutations, as well as some root cause genetic variances when it comes to depression and learning disorders in our young people. This was a fascinating and informative discussion. I had so much fun and I learned a ton, and I know you will too. So let's jump in. Dr. Ben Lynch, thank you so much for coming on the Dr. Tyna Show today. I am delighted to have you here. I've been trying to connect with you for years. I am a huge fan of yours. I did not tell you that off camera, but I was kind of fangirling when you said yes. So I'm very, very happy that you made the time. And I just want you to let the audience know who you are, and then I'm going to tell them how I know you.
Sounds good. So yeah, awesome to be here. It's been a long time coming. We've been interacting on Insta for, I don't even know how many years, seems like, back and forth. So I love your posts too, by the way. They're awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, boy, about me. It's kind of a windabout path of where I got to where I am today. And I think if you reflect on even on your own path in life, you probably realize it wasn't a straight shot either. So I grew up on a horse ranch in Central Oregon, and there my stepmother was a medical doctor. She was an OBGYN. So I was introduced to conventional medicine at 3 years old, and that's all I was surrounded by. And then I went to University of Washington. I was pre-med, and I didn't really like medicine. My experiences with medicine as a kid sucked. I mean, surgeries, who likes those? Silver nitrate, burning your nostrils because you have frequent nosebleeds. That hurt like hell. I had knee injury when I was rowing for the University of Washington Huskies, and they couldn't fix me, and they were going to recommend surgery and steroid shots. And I remember one day I just leaned over to pick up something that dropped, and it was a tight space or something, and I had to lean over funky, and I leaned over and I stretched to get it, and then I came back up and my knee pain was reduced that quickly. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go down and pretend I'm going to pick something up again, and stretched again, and my knee pain was even better. And so all I did was stretch, and my knee was fine. It's like, oh my God, I missed an entire year of racing because of that.
Wow.
And then they put me on 12 ibuprofen a day.
Oh, man.
So 3 times a day, because my knee was literally the size of a volleyball. And then I went to India because I took a year off of school. I dropped Washington, University of Washington, in my junior year because I was almost done with school and I didn't know what the hell I was going to study. And I knew I needed to take a time out. So I traveled South Pacific and Southeast Asia. And when in India, I got really sick. I still have the remaining medicine right there. And they prescribed me a bunch of herbs and other funky stuff. And that was my introduction to Ayurveda. And then I came back home to Seattle after that trip. And I went and saw an Ayurvedic practitioner who also had the initials ND after his name. And I was like, well, what's ND? And he told me, and I was like, oh, interesting. And he really helped me out. I mean, can you imagine what 12 ibuprofen did to a 18, 19, 20-year-old's liver? It was horrible. So he cleared that up, and that introduced me to naturopathic medicine. And then I was like, oh, what the hell? I'm going to do that. So went to naturopathic medical school and studied environmental medicine. And when I was studying environmental medicine with Dr. Hibbs, and then got to work with Dr. Bill Ray in Dallas, I noticed that patients would come in with the same conditions. They would have mold exposures or heavy metal exposures or certain pollen exposures. And the treatments were all the same. Patients were different. Conditions were the same. Treatments were the same. Different outcomes. And I was thinking, well, that's weird. I was like, their labs show the same thing. The conditions have been identified as the same thing, but they're not recovering the same way. And so then I asked all the supervising docs that I was around, I was like, there must be genetics involved here. No? They're like, oh yeah, maybe. And so that kind of, I wanted to know why people were recovering differently. And so that led me down the genetic rabbit hole. And then one year, somebody asked me about bipolar, and I was just rattling off the usual stuff: reactive hypoglycemia, fish oil, And I was like, I knew it was associated with folate, but I didn't know what. So I typed in folate bipolar into PubMed, and up comes this paper, talks about how bipolar is associated with MTHFR and folate metabolism. And I was like, I don't know what MTHFR looks, what the hell that is. So I double clicked it, pasted it back into the search of PubMed, and I was like, oh my God. I was like, what in the hell is this? And this is 2010, 2011. I was like, MTHFR is associated with congenital birth defects, cardiovascular issues, cancers, depression, anxiety. It was like, how do we not know this from medical school? And so that was my route. And ever since, I've realized that there's more than one human gene in the body. It's not just MTHFR. There's about 18,000 others, and they all communicate together. And they actually don't try to kill you. It's up to you to nurture them. And so that's where am today.
That was the quick version.
Yes.
I know you as a truth teller, and I remember the first time I saw you speak. I think it was a video or something. It was not in person, but I was just recently out of school. I graduated in 2008. I had learned about MTHFR through a mutual colleague of ours, Dr. Heidi Peterson. She was running it on people because she specialized in all things women's health. And she was running it on women because they were having frequent miscarriages and finding that as a link. But I didn't know much about it beyond that. And you came out with, I don't know, there's times in my life when I've seen people speak. This also happened with Dr. Alex Vasquez. When I saw him speak, it was like the words truth were coming out of their mouth like a ribbon. And I remember having that reaction to you. I was just like, who is this guy and what is he saying? And it was so far above my head, but I was able to, genetics was my worst subject. It was the one class in school that I had trouble with, but I was following what you were saying, and I bought a bunch of your courses, and I was just mind blown. And then your book, Dirty Genes, came out, which was so interesting. And you've always been an advocate really to the true principles of our medicine, which is, genetics loads the gun, but your environment, the way you live, and your lifestyle choices pull the trigger. And you're a brilliant formulator on top of it. You have your supplement company, Seeking Health, but you're not just white labeling a bunch of stuff. Like, you formulate these brilliant formulations to help the people in your life and to solve really complicated problems when that brain of yours is like, this isn't adding up. Like, how can I work this to use the nutrients that I know are going to be effective here and tweak them so that we get what we're looking for out of it? And it's been really fun watching your whole career. And that's why I was so excited to finally connect with you for real
Awesome.
on the podcast today.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. You shared insights about me that I've never heard other people say. And thank you for sharing those. That means a lot.
Yeah.
It's, white labeling is basically you take another brand and you slap your own brand sticker on it. That's kind of what white labeling is, if you weren't aware of that. But it's there's nothing wrong with it. But, at the end of the day, you're not creating anything new. You're not really enhancing the marketplace. You're not solving a problem. You might be enhancing awareness about a particular supplement that you're now selling under your brand, but you're not really solving a new problem. And so what I do is I look for holes in the marketplace that are not being solved, and I try to solve them. And my attention gets directed there because I hear people screaming from the rooftops, help me in this situation. And so I'll formulate for that group of people. And also I'll formulate for my own family and for myself. And a lot of the supplements have been formulated specifically for my own family and for myself. And it's been wonderful. I mean, I remember to this day, one of my first formulations was optimal iron plus cofactors. And I formulated that for my wife because she could not tolerate any iron supplement at all. And so then I learned all about iron metabolism. I was like, oh, this might be the reason. And I gave her my iron after I formulated it very nervously. She swallowed it. I was very nervous. And she speaks the truth. She's Russian and says it like it is. And she's like, ah, it's good. I feel good. And her iron levels went up and no constipation. I was like, oh, all right, I can do this. So.
Well, when I describe you to people, I'll say, I'll ask, do you know who Dr. Ben Lynch is? And most everybody says yes. But if they don't, the next words literally out of my mouth are, he's a mad genius. Like you have to look him up. Like that's how I see you, as like this mad genius. I envision you like up in your lab concocting the secret formulations to solve the problem. But you really care. I watch your Instagram and you read your own DMs and you respond to people and you help them, and you're really looking for answers for people's troubles and the pain that they're in. And that's amazing. And you are so smart, and you break things down in a way that I'm always learning. Like I'll listen to you talk about a subject I think I know a lot about, and I learned so much more. I don't know, you've got these like, you're looking at the back doors and the side alleys and all of these little nuances about it that people aren't even considering. And it's really,
it's fun. It's fun doing that, because when you do those nuances and you look for those side alleys and back doors, you're helping a subset of people that have never been helped before. I remember when I was in med school, and you probably remember this statistic too, is like if you help 70% or 80% of your patients, you're doing a really good job. I was like, that's a pretty shocking statistic. I mean, I was valedictorian in my high school, and I busted my ass at UW and still got my butt kicked and grades. But I did not like a C or B average in terms of patient outcomes. It just did not seem appropriate.
Yeah, for sure. I always tell patients, if I don't get you significantly better in 3 visits, I'm not doing my job right.
Yeah.
Like,
how many times have you pulled up a chart on a patient who's coming to see you for the first time, and it's literally like 3 charts, and each chart is 1.5 inches thick, and it's the same damn diagnosis.
Yep. And they're just chasing it from different angles. Yeah. It's wild. And I think that's unfortunately something I see a lot in our profession too. It's just kind of this general application of things that, well, it should make sense, and that's cool, but groundbreaking, innovation, that's what I always try to do that in my practice with regenerative medicine. And I always tried to practice up to the edge of my license, because I had to help people, and some people needed things done. And it's like, well, are we allowed to do this? Yeah, we're not sure. Is it dangerous? Not if you know what you're doing. Is it safe? Yeah. I would think backwards. Like, is this going to help them? Do I know what I'm doing? Do I understand the mechanism really well? From there, am I allowed to do this? Right. Is this legal? Am I doing anything that would endanger them? If so, what are the risks and repercussions of that? Have a discussion with them about it, called a PAR-Q, which you and I both know kind of went by the wayside the past few years, actual informed consent. And then, get the work done. And you do that with supplements. And I don't know a lot of people in our profession who are innovative, and it's been really cool to watch your career. So let's... Oh, go ahead.
And before we transition, I just want to share, with innovation comes risk, as you were sharing, and also the chance that you might be wrong and you make a mistake. And, I live in the realm of theoretical. I live in the realm of, like you said, mechanisms of action. I know the physiology. I know the biochemistry. I know how the genes are functioning, or at least I think I do, to an extent that makes enough sense to formulate something, to put those nutrients and compounds together to clean a particular subset of genes that are triggering cries for help, i.e. symptoms, that if I nurture those particular enzymatic functions, the genes will then be able to perform, the symptoms will go away, and the person will experience freedom once again. And so that's an area I live in. And we have a lot of colleagues and other health professionals and even non-health professionals who say, oh, Ben, You're such a quack. You don't, all the stuff that you do, there's no double blind placebo controlled trials. And it's like, well, yeah, that's true. And if I could live in that area, but a lot of people are already living in that area. And there's a lot of people who are not being served and struggling because we're waiting for 20 years to go from concept, which is theoretical, to all this research and, into finally producing something that may or may not work for 2 decades. And how many research papers have you read, Tina, that have been phenomenal, fantastic? And you look at the statistic, this paper has been downloaded 16 times.
Yeah.
And it was published 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, are you kidding me? So,
and you bring up a good point, which I mentioned earlier. Is this dangerous? If it's not dangerous, and also something else that I was taught through my naturopathic training, which I really abide by, is we sometimes think we need all this testing to prove something,
right,
when we can tell by the physiology and the symptom picture exactly what's going on. I don't need the labs to tell me it. And imaging is a good example in my world because I did all musculoskeletal medicine. I rarely imaged patients, and people couldn't believe it. I had a very, very busy regenerative medicine practice for over a decade, and I maybe ordered 5 MRIs in my whole career, and a few of those were because of the case was going to litigation because it was an accident of some sort. Like, this is my MRI, right. my brain, the patient's symptom picture, and my hands tell me what I need to know. And if something wasn't dangerous, or if the imaging or the testing isn't going to change the treatment any, then sometimes it's not that necessary that we go through all those hurdles to get. It's like, I have an idea, it's safe, I think it's going to help, let's do it, let's see what happens. And there's no real danger here. And the worst thing that could happen if I put PRP in somebody's area of their body, like, it's not like you're shooting up cortisone into there. I wasn't going to damage any tissues. I was just going to heal and regenerate more tissues in the area. Mm-hmm. The issue is, like, did I land on the spot? But that's where people get it wrong, is they think they need all this rigorous testing. And yes, but you're already working with substances in amounts that are safe. And then you're just recombining them into something that is going to have this application for this person in your life that you love, or this person that or many people reporting the same symptom picture, and you're like, I'm going to figure this out. It's like sleuthing it, and I think it's genius. I think it's how our medicine should be.
And laboratory testing is made by humans. It's interpreted by another human.
Yeah.
And it just because it's on a fancy PDF doesn't mean it's accurate. Laboratory testing is full of issues. Was the blood draw done improperly? Were you extremely stressed out prior to the blood draw? Because a lab test is usually just a moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, HbA1c. Okay, yeah, that one makes sense. But your TSH can vary even on your way to the doctor.
Right.
So, and the normal values, they're taking a subset of the population that could be one ethnic group, one, age group, one gender, and then they cast it out to all ethnicities, all genders, which there are 2, and all ages. And so, it's absurd. And so just because you think a lab test, you need to have it done, that lab test could be absolute garbage. And I have many, many, many experiences with garbage lab tests. And that's why I usually don't run them. I can just, like you said, if you ask the right question, you can get the right answer. If you ask the wrong question, you're guaranteed the wrong answer. So you have to know how to frame your questions. And that's the very good skill set of a good health professional.
And you got to know your shit to ask the good questions. That's the difference. And when people say, oh, these lousy doctors out there, I'm like, yeah, maybe they're just not educated well enough. Maybe they just don't. I mean, I don't know.
They're not taught logic. They're taught algorithms.
Yeah, exactly.
They're trying to pigeon you hole into a box, and that box has a label on it, which is an ICD-10 code, which then, dictates treatment. That's all they're trying to do. They're trying to just narrow you down through the algorithm, put you in a box, and then you might be coming out of that box later with their treatments, but usually not, because the treatments are usually ineffective.
And patients often want a diagnosis, and I often tell them, like, you don't need a diagnosis. We've got like I go back to the musculoskeletal thing because that's what I know really well, but I would often see patients come in with an immunologic component to their pain.
Yes.
Were they autoimmune? Did all the autoimmune tests come back? I don't know. I never ran them, but I know lots of people who came in having already ran them, and there are so many false positives and false negatives in
it
that
doesn't matter.
sect of labs. Yeah. I'm like, your immune system is involved here. Somehow we have to mitigate that, right? The immune system's always involved. The hormones are always involved. Like those are the things we have to address. And they'd be like, how are my hormones, what I eat, my immune system having to do with my knee pain? And I'm like, a lot. So just understanding these mechanisms, even if it's that was my wheelhouse, right? So I knew that really well. That's good medicine. But you got to know your shit in that wheelhouse. And I think a lot of doctors are, like you said, they're really confined to these boxes and these algorithms because, well, it's easier. It's standard of care. It kind of keeps them out of the heat, right? Like we've seen in the past few years, a lot of doctors didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to get into any of the heat. And that's not how you and I are built. So
no.
I'm like, bring it on. Let's go. Well, I've always been actually really relieved that you were just up north of me because I'm like, well, if the shit ever hits the fan, I got Ben up there. Like I got a good smart doctor up just a few hours away. So we're at least in the same area of the world. We endured the West Coast together. I don't think people understand what was happening on the West Coast.
And we both don't know why, except for it is extremely beautiful. I think that's why.
It's God's country.
It is. It is amazing.
It's beautiful land. Energetically, it's really incredible. I don't know how the inhabitants of it have gotten so led astray politically, but it's such a beautiful, and Oregon's very different than Washington, and it's a different vibe, but it's still that majestic beauty. It really starts like in Northern California and goes up, and it's just so incredible. If people haven't seen it, especially during the summer, it's like it's God's country.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to jump into this MTHFR discussion because it's become a hot topic again because there's a certain person running around the internet making a big deal out of it. And so everyone's asking me, and I decided I was going to have you on to talk about it because you're the GOAT when it comes to MTHFR. So what is it? What's going on? And then how much do we need to worry about it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I've been talking about MTHFR since 2011. There's people talking about MTHFR before I was talking about it. Researchers were talking about it well before they were talking about it. So, I mean, there's been a lot of people looking at this particular gene for a long, long time. And I remember when I listened to a lady talking about MTHFR, I was like, okay, so I was learning from her. And what she was saying was not making any sense. And I tried making her stuff make sense. And it didn't make sense. And I remember it's like when we were studying for board exams, how you get headaches and you just really, really have mental fatigue. And I would try to listen to this lady and I just couldn't figure out what the hell she was saying. It didn't make sense. And so then I was like, okay, I'm just going to start over. And so I literally would have a piece of paper from my printer and I just wrote down MTHFR, put a circle around it. And then I started mapping and creating a map. And I soon realized that anytime I read a research paper that had something associated with MTHFR, I would add it to my piece of paper. Riboflavin is a cofactor for MTHFR. So if you're deficient in riboflavin, then your MTHFR enzyme won't perform because it's like having your car sitting in your parking lot that's fully functional, gas, brand new, but if you don't have the key, it ain't going to work. Same thing with riboflavin, doesn't work. Well, you can take vitamin B2. Well, not so fast. Vitamin B2 has to convert to active riboflavin known as FAD in the human body. That's done by the thyroid hormone, thyroxine, so you can't be hypothyroid. Whoa. So, we just focus on the SNP. We focus on the gene and we do genetic testing. And then we look for if there's a deviation in the gene that's not typically found in, most populations. And so I don't like saying normal. I don't like saying abnormal or bad. I like the words typical and I like the words variation. So let me back up a little bit. I've been talking about this for so long, and I'm so in the weeds that it's hard for me to simplify something sometimes. So MTHFR is one gene out of 18,000 genes in your human body. Okay, let's keep that straight. It is a very important one. Very, very important because it is associated with making a type of folate called methylfolate. And 80% of the folate in your blood should be this form of methylfolate. You all are familiar with folic acid. Some of you, but very few of you, are familiar with folinic acid. And I would say more of you now are aware of this type of folate called methylfolate. So if you look at folic acid, the chemical structure of folic acid, and you look at the chemical structure of methylfolate, and if you're not a chemist, you're going to say, wow, they did a damn good job because folic acid is made in the lab, it's synthesized, it's not even found in nature anywhere, but it looks identical to methylfolate, except there's a little line, and that little line holds a carbon and 3 hydrogens, which is a methyl group. And to put that little carbon and 3 hydrogens onto methylfolate requires about 6 different enzymatic steps through the folate pathway. MTHFR is the last step in order to do that. MTHFR puts that methyl group on there, and then it helps synthesize 80% of your type of folate. If you do not have 80% of your folate in your blood called methylfolate, then you're going to have symptoms. And we get very quick to make statements. MTHFR causes cancer. MTHFR causes depression. MTHFR causes cardiovascular disease. MTHFR caused my bipolar. Hold on. What's the job of MTHFR? Anytime you're studying a gene, and believe me, you're studying MTHFR now, but you're going to start joining the nerd crew and you're going to start learning about a bunch of other genes because you're going to start realizing that my body is made up of genes and genes have jobs to do. And the more I understand about my business, my employees, because you're the boss of all 18,000. And so the more you understand all your employees and you give them the tools that they need, you're going to have a well-functioning business, a well-functioning body, and you're going to experience freedom, which is why a lot of us run our businesses in the first place, to experience freedom. So ultimately, you are the boss of your own body. You have 18,000 plus employees. I don't know why they don't know the exact number of genes in the human body by now, but it seems like they don't. They keep changing it. And so MTHFR is a significant one because it makes this methylfolate. And then why is methylfolate so important? Because it supports this pathway called methylation. And so you hear folate, folic acid, then you hear methylfolate, and then you hear methylation. Okay, that methyl keeps coming up. And that methyl is that simple compound, and that compound gets passed to different things. When it gets passed to arsenic, arsenic becomes less problematic. When methyl groups get passed to histamine, less problematic. Estrogens, same thing, less problematic, less toxic. And then you pass a methyl group to certain genes, it turns them on and it turns them off. So it helps other genes turn on and off. And so basically, methylation is responsible for hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands of biochemical things that are happening in your body constantly, all day, all night, every millisecond of your life. And that can be disrupted by not having enough methylfolate, and that can be disrupted by having an MTHFR genetic variation that you're not taking care of. And how significant is it that you're having an MTHFR genetic variation? I say, let's first step back. It is acquired. You've inherited your MTHFR genetic variation from your mom and possibly from your dad. And it has been around for a long, long, long time, as long as humans have been around. It's been around. And it's been passed on to us living in the year 2024, and we are survival of the fittest, apparently. I would say that we are in a bit of unnatural deselection period right now instead of natural selection, which is very scary. And so, yes, I think that the population is actually getting more genetically inferior than genetically superior. And we are actually seeing an increase in the MTHFR genetic variation in the population because of, and I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying I'm the messenger here, IVF treatments, prenatal vitamins, improved pregnancy support. I'm all for it. But we just have to be mindful that our children are going to be born with genetic variations, which have otherwise died in utero. So is MTHFR significant? Yes, for sure, especially in susceptible populations. If you are not eating red meat If you are vegan or vegetarian and you're more of a carbitarian and you're not supplementing with your vitamin B12 or your homocysteine levels are elevated, or you're not eating leafy green vegetables or you're not eating organs, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble. And our present day lifestyle environment, being sedentary, depleted soils, industrialized foods, chemicals everywhere, medications everywhere, they are dirtying, i.e. messing up our function of our MTHFR variation, our MTHFR enzyme more. So having an MTHFR genetic variation makes you more vulnerable. It doesn't make you have any specific condition. So having an MTHFR genetic variation does not equal pregnancy loss or infertility or depression. It's not like celiac disease equals certain subset of genetic variations. Bam. ALS, that has some genetic components to it, but it's like 1 to 3% of ALS is genetic. Very small subset. Most of it's environmental. Cancer, 1 to 5% of cancers are genetic. Everybody's running out and doing the BRCA gene. And if they have the BRCA gene, they do radical mastectomies. I understand there's a lot of fear. You've done genetic testing on your MTHFR enzyme. You found out that you have a variation in there. How significant is it? Makes you more and more nervous. But I will be honest, Tina, I did genetic testing on myself and my family 2011. I found out that I have the MTHFR compound heterozygous, meaning one copy of 677, one copy of 1298, and all these numbers are just telling you in what position is the genetic variation found in the long MTHFR gene. That's all those numbers mean. And so my MTHFR enzyme has a reduced capacity to perform by about 70%.
I have the same. That's when I found you, got my testing done and I was like, oh no. And you're going to explain here why we're not that. I mean, we can be concerned, but it's not our fate.
No, it's not our fate. In fact, I'm 50 years old now and I'm healthier now at 50 than I was in my 20s, which is pretty ridiculous according to traditional mindset and thinking. And it's because I've cleaned my genes. And the concept of, you brought it up earlier of my book, Dirty Genes. And I'll just say that the concept of dirty genes is you have these genes, and if they're not functioning very well, you get symptoms. And the symptoms are associated with a gene that's not performing. And a gene that's not performing, I call it dirty. And I call it dirty. I don't call it broken. I call it dirty because you can clean up a dirty gene. And if your gene is performing at its best, it's now clean. So if you walk into a clean home, you perform well. It feels good. You're mentally relaxed. You're not stressed out and anxious. You walk into a dirty home, you feel anxious. That, the hoarding mentality, that it makes you just kind of more nervous and what makes you hoard even more. But having clean genes is very important. And it happens with everything that you do or you don't do. I choose not to drink alcohol. I can't. I have a 70% reduced ability to produce methylfolate. So that doesn't mean that I'm broken and I have to take methylfolate. I still have 30% capacity. If you got in your car and you look at your gas tank and you have 20% of gas left in your tank, does that mean that you can't drive anywhere? No. That means you can drive somewhere. And if it's a long way, you need to refill it up. If you just a short jaunt, the store and back in your neighborhood, no problem. And so if you take a long trip of doing dirty things to your body, exposing yourself to nitrous oxide, consuming folic acid, not eating well, being in a toxic relationship, that 30% of your MTHFR enzyme is not going to be sufficient and you will get symptoms. So that's how I look at it. It's just bandwidth. You have reduced bandwidth in certain areas. And Dr. Tom O'Brien had a great example of a genetic variation. He said, imagine that you have a chain and you're looking at all the links in the chain. I like to actually use a rope. You'll say you're a rock climber and you have a rope and you're inspecting your rope before you go climbing. And you're like, oh, we've got some frays here. That's not so bad. And Paston is like, oh, we got a really thin area of the rope here and it's really well frayed. Well, we can use the rope, but we got to be mindful of this area. In fact, maybe we can tie it and make extra knots here or do something, or we just won't drape that over a cliff. So you found a vulnerable position in the rope and you've identified it, and that's healthy. Okay. So identifying that you've had the MTHFR enzyme is a healthy thing. Don't be scared about it. You know that you have a vulnerability. Now you know you have certain bandwidth, and you just need to be more proactive in your life, and you understand the lifestyle choices for you really matter. And it honestly is kind of a godsend, because you're going to take better health knowing that you have an MTHFR genetic variation than you probably would if you didn't. And I also say something on the flip side. Some of you are really, really sick and struggling, and you're looking to genetic testing to be looking for that needle in the haystack. And I swear I've got MTHFR. My homocysteine is high. I've got cardiovascular disease and risk in my family, and had 4 miscarriages. And you do the MTHFR test, normal, typical, no variation found. And you're like, oh, what the hell? I swore I had it. Well, maybe it's nitric oxide synthase. Maybe it's TNF alpha. Maybe it's APOE4/4. Maybe it's APOE3/4. Maybe it's no genetic variations at all. Maybe you're clean as a whistle in terms of genetic variations and you're absolutely typical, but your environment is full of mold. You're in a toxic relationship. You're eating like crap. You drink 4 days a week, and you're very, very sedentary in your job. And plus, you handle chemicals all day in your job as well. So that could be a big reason. So that is something that I've seen so many times, where people do genetic testing and they're frustrated that they don't find a SNP or a genetic variation to put the blame on.
Right. Well, it can be an excuse. I've seen a lot of patients use it that way, and a lot of folks online say, "Oh, well, I have this," and it's kind of like this like we talked about before, like it defines them, and I have this mutation, and that's the reason why these things are happening. Or conversely, they want to find out that it's that because they don't want to take responsibility for all of the other lifestyle factors that are in there. And I'm with you. I've always said, like, my autoimmune disease, whatever issues I have, they're all blessings in disguise, because they keep me clean. Like, they keep me honest. I don't have a lot of variability to mess around, and I don't get to behave the way I used to, and I don't get to behave the way that a lot of folks can get away with. I need to keep it, cinched up and keep it clean. Otherwise, I fall apart pretty quickly. I don't have a lot of wiggle room on that. And that's the way I look at MTHFR and the way I would tell patients is like, this just means you have less wiggle room, but that's honestly a good thing. It keeps you honest, and it makes you really pay attention to the choices you're making each day. That's it.
If you wait too long to have a wake-up call that you are actually a summation of the actions that you take or don't take in your life, that's essentially who you are as a person, all the actions that you take or you don't take. Some of the best TED Talks that have been done are by people who have had a tremendous life scare, stroke of genius, where a woman was studying stroke and she actually had a stroke while in the shower. And she was she knew exactly what was going on. She was saying, oh, wow, this is actually interesting. And she was talking about what she was experiencing as she had the stroke, because she studied the stroke. And then, people with cancer, oh yeah, I had cancer, and I knew exactly why I got it. And I overcame that. It was a big, huge wake up call for me. People very close to dying, melanomas. I've had friends who, serious car wrecks, almost died. And people I've known publicly. I mean, Brendan Bouchard almost died. And he turned his life around and is like, wow, I got one life to live. I almost died. I'm going to make the most of it. And you see that over and over with people who have had horrible, traumatic life events and scares turn around and make make an amazing life for themselves. And so with genetic testing, you can utilize genetic testing to prevent those scares, to optimize and clean your potentially dirty genes and then live a life to the fullest. And why do we have to wait, Tina, for the 11:45 hour to be slapped in the face to finally stop eating Twinkies or to move or to lift weights or, be in a healthy relationship? Why do you think you have to be? Why are you the one living in a toxic relationship? Get the hell out of there.
Isn't it weird? Humans are so weird that way. We got to get pushed up to the edge. That's the only genetic testing I've ever had done was the MTHFR. I've never done anything further. I didn't want to know because in my opinion, it matters less. And the way that I live my life matters more at the end of the day. So I figured I'm just going to do my very best. I grew up, my backstory, I was a very sick kid and I was always in and out of the doctors, and I was just collecting diagnoses as I went along. And I got together with my mentor, Dr. Rick Marinelli. Did you ever meet him, Dr. Rick?
I know the name. I may have met him at some point.
He died of cancer in 2013. He was a huge force in our profession. He's a big reason.
That's right.
Yeah, he was my mentor. I spent 20 years with him. And he always was like, this is your life and these are your choices. I can give you supplements. I can tell you what to do, but like none of it matters if you don't do it, right? So for me, it's just been this kind of, I just got tired of collecting reasons why I was messed up, so I didn't want to know. Maybe someday I will do it, but maybe after talking to you. But I really just thought I'm just going to live my best life and take good care of myself, because that MTHFR, that double hit was enough for me. After that's when I found you. I went into your work on that one and I was like, man, this is foreboding. And it kind of freaked me out for a minute. And then I'm like, no, this is my life. Same reason I don't want to know what my low back looks like. My low back imaging was so bad when I was in chiropractic college, they wouldn't even show it to me. They're like, you don't want to see this, because I was a gymnast and I have some kind of inflammatory, I have a spondylo, arthritis, and it was starting to show itself. And so to this day, I'm like, I don't want to know what my low back looks like. I had a CT scan done for a very specific reason. And I was like, I don't want to see the images. I don't want any of this in my head. Like, I am going to continue to lift weights. I'm going to continue to be as mobile as possible. I'm going to continue to take the best care of myself that I can, because it doesn't matter what I have or don't have genetically. We have to endure this toxic planet, and
you do.
There's a lot we're swimming through. So we got to take good care of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And it makes sense. And how I utilize genetic testing these days is when you become well-versed in genetics, you can identify potential vulnerabilities or susceptibilities very quickly, and you know how to handle them. And when I looked at my histamine pathway, so there's about 7 genes that metabolize histamine and get out of your body. And that's it. That's it. So all these people are struggling with high levels of histamine. And I looked at my histamine pathway after all the research. I was like, wow, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's like 7 genes that are associated with the breakdown of histamine. And then you have other ones as well. But it's like, that's not difficult to have healthy levels of histamine. It's not. And so if you do genetic testing and you identify a bunch of slowdowns in your histamine pathway or amplifications of other ones, like I have my histamine H1 receptor is found in your brain, and I have a very sensitive H1 receptor. And it makes so much sense because I'm one of those weirdos that can be sensitive to Wi-Fi and EMF and Bluetooth, seasickness, motion sickness. I could never get on the merry-go-round at school. Amusement parks, hell no, I'm not getting on those rides. Car sick, I can't look at my phone. I'm way better than I used to be. But, now I can at least tolerate Wi-Fi for a period of time before I struggle, before it was on and I struggled. So it can really identify things. One of my sons has a very quick metabolism of eliminating dopamine out of his brain. I mean, very fast. And a buddy of mine, an influencer, has a very fast elimination of serotonin and dopamine, both. And so then I gave him the serotonin, the dopamine nutrients, and he was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I feel great. And when I gave my son the dopamine nutrients for his fast dopamine pathway, he was transformed in 30 minutes.
Wow.
30 minutes. He was laying in his bed as a teenager, 17, I think, or 18. I think he was, around those ages. He was in running starts, so he didn't, he was in a college program, so he didn't have to run to high school every single day. So some days he would skip class. But I went up to his room. He was in bed at 1:00 in the afternoon. Like, dude, get up. His room was a mess. Acne, ate like crap. Closet's a mess. Bathroom's a disaster. And so one day I remember I opened his genetic report, and because I think, God, I think he might be depressed. And when you're depressed as a teenager, you don't know what depression is.
Yeah.
You don't know that. It's just a feeling. And I opened his genetic report. I was like, oh my God, this kid is low dopamine. And when he eats a lot of protein, he feels great. When he's not eating protein, he eats a bunch of crap to lift the dopamine. So I formulated a dopamine supplement for him. And I went in his room like a month later, around the same time, still on his bed. And you can't yell at kids sometimes. I mean, you can, but it to no avail. It's just
it just goes.
Yeah, it's like
they just look at you like you're nuts and ignore you more.
Yeah, if the kid's depressed, clinically depressed, or just depressed, yelling at him is not going to make him feel better. It's going to make him feel worse. So I remember I threw him 2 capsules because that was the serving size. I threw 2 capsules of the pills to him in bed, and he was like, "What's this?" I said, "You'll find out." I don't like giving biases on my new formulations. And I remember, I looked around his room, same thing, mess. He was eating, he's in bed, everything's just trashed. And then I came up a couple hours later, and, because I work from home, open his door. He's sitting at his desk with his headphones on, listening to music. Room's clean, bed's made, peer in, closet's clean.
Wow.
I smile, I close the door, and then I work the rest of the day. I don't say anything to him. And his older brother is a clean freak, OCD, which is associated with serotonin deficiency, by the way, and his serotonin pathway is a mess. So I gave him serotonin nutrients. He does well on that one. And so he was ripping his brother apart. It's like, dude, you eat like crap. You just are always eating, ho-hos and donuts and pastries. And will you just clean up your diet, man? Just laughing. And I'm just smiling. And my other son just looks at me and goes, dude, back off. I haven't eaten any crap today. In fact, I don't think I've eaten at all. And he's like, he looks at me and he sees me smiling. He goes,
That's
Dad, what'd you give me?
You took the whole teenage vibe away. You turned him into a functioning young man.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He's in college now, and he lives on that supplement, and he's thriving. He eats well. His acne's gone. He's driven. He's motivated. He's hiking. It's awesome. He's thriving. And so when you know how to interpret genetic reports and you remove the fear behind it, you can actually nurture and nourish the body. And I'm not saying the supplements are the end all be all. A supplement is designed to add, it's defined as to add to or enhance. That's what supplement means. You can't out supplement a shitty diet. You can't out supplement, a shitty environment. So he's in California in the sun. He wakes up, the sun's blasting through his window. He's not in foggy, gray, dark Seattle that's full of rain. So that environmental shift was huge for him. So
that's everything. Yeah, just light deficiency alone will, I'm sure, impact how these genes play out and what they decide to do. And again, like, it's the things we eat, it's the life we live, it's the toxicity. I mean, you've listed them off a few times, and relationships, stress levels, all of that will determine how those genes play out. And we have so much control over it. We're in this weird world where people still believe that their genes are their fate. And I'm like, no. You have so much control. We were talking about supplements and we were talking about MTHFR. And I just want you to quickly explain why throwing a bunch of methylated B vitamins at a MTHFR mutation may not always be the solution, or even in some cases, the best idea. What's that all about?
Yeah, I equate I'm looking for an analogy here. They say never pour gas on a fire, and putting methylation or methylfolate in a body without knowing really what's going on is kind of like putting gas on a fire. You can be inflamed, which is fire, and you can really enhance that flame. You really enhance biochemistry fast and furiously with methylfolate. And you can be overwhelming a bunch of other genes that are not ready for that at all. So, have you ever been in a situation where you're helping someone lift something and there's like six other people trying to carry that same thing? And if you don't all coordinate, someone's going to trip and fall and get under that heavy thing and get smashed. And you're, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, whoa, slow down, or hold up, sleet up, or whoa, lift it higher. We've all been there. And the genes are saying the same damn thing because there's 18,000 of them and they do work together. And so you're focused on one, you give the methylfolate and all these other genes that have to respond to that methylfolate. Because MTHFR, its job is to make methylfolate. And what you did is you maintained a lazy MTHFR. You just bypassed it. You did nothing actually to support your MTHFR enzyme at all. You just bypassed it. So keep that in mind. You are not helping your MTHFR enzyme by taking methylfolate. You are bypassing it.
Yes.
That's actually something I don't think I've ever said before. And it's very, very true. But you're also overwhelming countless of other enzymes because of it, and they cannot handle the load. If you are making, you're in a factory and you're making donuts, and there's one part of the assembly line that you're just like, you know what, the hell with this. I get paid more if I make more bags. And you start pumping out the bags really fast. And now the bags are just stacked up and it's causing issues and the donuts aren't sliding into the bags anymore. There's consequences anytime you change something that works in a beautiful, methodical system. And I don't mean to equate the body as an assembly line, because it's not. But one action leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to 30 different others, which leads to 1,000 different others very fast. Very, very fast.
Yeah,
And
you can't. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
and methylfolate does that. And if you don't need it, you're going to get side effects that suck. And the worst part of the side effects that suck is you do not think that the side effects that you are experiencing are caused by the methylfolate because you truly believe you need the methylfolate. So now you have the headache, irritability, difficulty sleeping, possible joint pain, acne, anxiousness, and just an otherwise a feeling of just not right. It's just buzz, and you cannot control it. Migraines also, and I've seen it so many times where people will take the methylfolate and they'll experience those side effects, and they'll come they'll say, doc, I've got these symptoms. Well, what's wrong? Well, I got anxiousness. I can't fall asleep. So now they're put on a sedative. Methylfolate never got removed, never got adjusted. So now they're supplementing to offset the supplement that they don't need, and really they don't need any. Now they're taking 3 or 4.
Yes. What about the other methyl donors, like a methylcobalamin? Can that create the
Yeah.
same kind of havoc?
Yeah. So methylcobalamin and methylfolate are a tag team. They are an essential duo. And you essentially have to have equal amounts of both or healthy levels of both in order to function. You could take a bunch of methylfolate and still not experience any results at all. Or you can take a bunch of methylcobalamin, not experience any results. But if you take both, wow, look out. Now you're really making those biochemicals pathways spin and move. So there's a process called well, not a process, a system called methyl trapping. And methyl trapping, like methylation, methylcobalamin, methylfolate, you hear it again. Methylcobalamin is cobalamin with a methyl group, and they go through an enzyme called methionine synthase, and MTHFR makes the methylfolate, which then goes through to methionine synthase, which requires methylcobalamin, and they meet up at the same area. And so that's where they meet up. So you need to have both. So I do offer methylfolate alone at Seeking Health, but our most popular is the methyl B12 methylfolate lozenge. And that makes sense because that is the one that people really need to be supportive with. And methylcobalamin can cause the same side effects as methylfolate. And it can cause the same side effects because they are directly connected with each other. They spin the same cycles.
Yep. That's I have spun that cycle too hard with high levels of methylcobalamin injectable. And one minute I'm great and the next minute it's not so great. So that's
well,
another.
And then here's the thing too with these powerful nutrients. You possibly you've never experienced that feeling before. Like my son with the dopamine, and it was interesting. After I gave him the dopamine, I'll get on the methylfolate here in a second. But I gave him the dopamine, and I told him, "Hey, man, I think you were actually depressed." He goes, I didn't really know what depression was or depression is, but now that I've been over there, you're right. I was feeling that way, but I didn't know I was depressed. I just felt unmotivated and kind of blue, but not sad. And it was sad to hear, but it was also I wish I recorded that moment because it was so interesting how he said it. Because how in the hell does a teenager know that they're depressed? They don't.
They don't. No, we watch it. We see it. I've seen depressed teenagers, and I have a daughter who struggled very heavily with depression, and she just won't take the damn supplements, Ben, that I give her. So I can't resolve it as easily as I want to. She's coming around though. She's 24 now. She's starting to get it. But they don't. I saw it again with another teenager who I'm close to, and there's a flatness that takes over, a dullness to their life, and they just sort of retreat to their room. And I remember telling everybody in this young man's life, I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's depressed, and they're like, no, he's fine. I haven't heard him say anything, and I'm like, no, they don't come out and say it. They just sort of lose their zest for life and retreat to their room and don't come out. And it's like a dullness, like I don't know. It's like a gray cloud takes over, and you don't. And I was this way as a teenager too. You don't feel sad. You just don't want to get out of bed. You just want to sleep it all away. So if we could get these young kids the support they need, I mean, what a different world it would be, right? So much of the anxiety and the flat mood. Oh yeah, the damn cell phones.
Horrible.
Well, your kids are the same. Your kids are a bit younger, but like they grew up in that same generation of these damn smartphones, and what a time that was. Oh, my daughter was at the very front end of that, and it's just a different world with those things, the cyberbullying, and I can't imagine what it's doing to their young brains. Not even the actual act of looking at it, which is bad enough, but just what the world is happening around them with it, and
what's being served to them,
and the reach that people have to their brains and to their emotions and their heart. It's really. I'm with Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you've seen his work. He just came out with a book, The Anxious Generation, and he's really trying to get parents to take cell phones away from their kids. I'm here for it. I think they're devastating. Well, speaking of brains and young people, what about acetylcholine? We were talking about this before we turned the cameras on. You were bringing up some really interesting info about acetylcholine, Adderall, nicotine. Like, what's the connection there?
Yeah. So my rabbit hole for acetylcholine came into my life because another one of my sons struggled in school big time. He was in junior high at the time. And I mean, elementary school, he struggled. And then I was just like, well, he's elementary school. Teachers actually did suck. When you got to junior high, teachers again sucked. But I remember one time I was sitting down at the dinner table with him, helping him study. We weren't eating, we were just studying. And he was doing 2-digit math, 20 times 15. And I showed him the steps. And he's like, okay, he finally got it. And then I said, okay, 20 times 15 is this. Okay. He goes, yeah. And then I switched numbers around, 15 times 20. lost it. He put his head down on the table and started crying and was like, I can't, I don't know how to do this. I was like, dude, you follow the same set. It's the same thing. I just turned the numbers around. And then I knew that there was something going on. His memory was so bad that he couldn't remember the steps that we just did. And I was like, this is a big red flag. And he did get concussed a couple times. Pretty badly from school. And I thought I dealt with it. I gave him the glutathione. I gave him the fish oil. I gave him the curcumin. I did the ND daddy things. And then, I thought I was done. And then I kept trying to figure it out and I couldn't figure it out. And finally I said, you know what? I'm going to take a Dr. Daniel Amen to an Amen clinics, do a SPECT scan. I keep hearing about SPECT scans. Done organic acid testing, still failing, still not helping. Did a SPECT scan on him, and just keep it short. We finally got the results, and Dr. Amen gets on the other end of Zoom because he was in LA. I went to the clinic here in Bellevue, and he's like, he looked at my son. He was like, man, said you had a very simple task of hitting spacebar if you saw the letter X. That was your task. And we had dinosaurs going across the screen. We had different letters, different numbers, nothing, X, spacebar. And I watched him from a distance. He nailed it. I don't think he missed one. And I was all proud of myself. I was like, oh, that's my son. He's nailing this test. And then Dr. Amen was like, I don't think I've ever seen one overthink as much as you, man. Your entire brain is lit up to hit spacebar when you saw the letter X. You're using your entire brain. And he goes, that was a very simple task. And I was like, oh, he's overwhelmed. And so when you look at those kids on the autism spectrum, they have to wear earmuffs. They have to sit alone because they're overwhelmed. So any amount of information that is above and beyond that they can process puts them over the edge. And autism is a cholinergic deficiency. Cholinergic deficiency. Choline and acetylcholine are parasympathetic. It is one of the leading parasympathetic neurotransmitters in the brain. Very calming and supportive of learning. And I remember Dr. Amen, after that, gave him a supplement for like supporting dopamine and serotonin. And I was confused. I was like, all right, I'll try it, but doesn't make sense to me. Tried it, didn't work. So for 3 years, I was formulating something, trying to figure out how to support my kid. Finally, I came up with acetylcholine in my research, and I gave him the acetylcholine supplement. Didn't do anything. And I knew I was right. So I kept, acetylcholine is easily broken down in the brain. Any type of inflammation that you have in the brain, acetylcholine will bust. There's an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. And acetylcholinesterase eats acetylcholine for breakfast, lunch, and dinner quickly. So you can take all the choline. You can eat that you want, supplements, choline bitartrate, CDP choline, doesn't matter. You take the best cholines, won't matter. You could eat a ton of meat, caviar, eggs, high in choline, doesn't matter. You have to slow acetylcholinesterase. And you do that by other herbs and compounds. And then you have to have cofactors. You could take all the choline you want and all the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors that you want, but you have to support the enzymes that actually take the choline and synthesize it into acetylcholine. Requires B5 and other nutrients as well. And so then I started doing that. In 13th revision, I gave it to him one day. And he came back from school and he's like, Dad, that's my genius pill. And this kid told stories. I didn't know if he was lying to me or what. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. He goes, no, Dad, I was answering every question in class. I was like, on.
Amazing.
What's going on here? And then he took tests, A. Homework, A. Oh, I was like, wow, okay. And so now he's essentially a straight A student. He's the smartest kid in his chemistry class. He grinds, but he gets it. He still has moments where he struggles, and he took optimal focus again today. But what I will share with you that's very interesting, as I looked at his genetics, it's like, where is this blockage in acetylcholine? I'm not seeing it. But I don't have that many genes with acetylcholine formation, honestly. There aren't that many genetic variations associated with diminished acetylcholine production. The research isn't really there. Big pharma looks at a lot of serotonin. They look at dopamine big time, but they don't really look at acetylcholine. And in my research, I was like, for some reason, I was like, is APOE associated with learning difficulties? And it was. And my son, who had the learning difficulties and did well on acetylcholine, also is an APOE4 kid. And I was like, oh, he's not going to do concussion-based sports. You know, he played soccer, so headers. Let's not have you do headers. And just be careful. No football for you. And so that's kind of what the end of it. I was like, well, we do have a lot of dementia in my family. I mean, on both sides, my wife and me. And so I was nervous about that. But learning disorders in kids exist. The more four alleles that you have, the more severe your learning difficulties are. So if you're APOE2/4, learning difficulty, APOE4/4, significant learning difficulty, APOE4/4 boy, significant learning difficulty, APOE4/4 girl, severe learning difficulty.
Wow.
Wow. It was right. I was like, no one is talking about this. And all they talk about with APOE3/4 or 3/3 or whatever is just like, oh, you're more likely to get dementia and Alzheimer's than not. And that's it. You're like, oh, I'm just going to wait until I'm 60, 70, and I'm going to start getting my memory issues. And there it is. I can't do anything. Well, it turns out that you can. The APOE4 variation reduces the synthesis of acetylcholine. There is an association somehow with APOE4 that the production of acetylcholine in your brain is diminished. And APOE4 is associated with learning, memory, and REM sleep. I remember I put an Oura ring on my kid, my wife's, because he was young at the time, and my wife has smaller hands than I do, thankfully. So I put an Oura ring on him, deep sleep. Oof, wow, kicked my ass in deep sleep. REM, 0.
Wow.
0 REM. And it was consistent. I was like, and I was Googling what's associated with REM sleep. And that was like a year or something prior to me formulating. And later I Googled REM sleep and acetylcholine. It's associated with REM sleep. He started dreaming. His REM sleep I haven't measured it, but I mean, he's actively dreaming now. And he'd never dreamed before. It's like, you dream? No, I never dream. Oh my gosh. And REM is how you make the memories. And what's also fascinating is acetylcholine. Nobody talks about this either. Acetylcholine is a natural anti-inflammatory in the brain. So it is a recipe for disaster for kids having an APOE4 variant, for learning, for memory, for thriving in life, and for having decreased inflammation in the brain. And it's a vicious cycle. The more inflammation as you have, the faster you break down acetylcholine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and what's also fascinating with the supplement that I gave him a third of a serving. So the serving size is 3 capsules. I gave him 1. And I usually take just 1 myself. Other people who are, into Zins or vaping, they typically take 3. Because vaping and nicotine is the same receptor. I'll get to that in a second. But what I've noticed with my son is he only uses the optimal focus periodically, usually only when he has tests or sometimes when he's just noticing he's not learning as well as he should in school. So he took a capsule this morning and he took a capsule yesterday. Um, and, but I've noticed that I think the benefits are sustained for a long period of time because if acetylcholine is a natural anti-inflammatory in the brain, if you decrease the inflammation in your brain, then all systems are a go. So you're going to have your dopamine, your serotonin, your histamine levels, your nitric oxide levels, your glutathione levels. All that is going to be humming along just fine. And so there was a lady who emailed my customer support team and shared a story that her husband's Lewy body dementia reversed completely. And
Wow.
I was like, okay. But he's starting to have muscle cramping. Too much acetylcholine can cause muscle cramps. And I said, so have her, here's my email, give it to her. It's pretty rare that I do that, but this was a significant deal. And so she reached out to me. I emailed her back. I said, tell me what happened. So she goes, my husband took a capsule. He's been doing the Dale Bredesen protocol for some time, some improvements, but we hit a roadblock, wasn't really improving. Got the optimal focus, gave him the optimal focus, one capsule. The first day that he took it, he had she said, his words were, a veil was lifted. It brought tears to my eyes.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And he said, I said, his muscle cramping is associated because he's taking too much. He says, I will not get that bottle out of his hand. He goes, he went from gone walking with a cane and not doing well in his cognitive performance. He's scoring 100% on his cognitive performance tests now.
Wow.
And so it's, Dale Bredesen protocol probably cleaned up a lot of the crap, and he was deficient in the choline, and that was the last step. So I'm not saying that it reversed his Lewy body dementia. I'm saying that it supported the Bredesen protocol, which is basically naturopathic medicine. And then he found the missing link, and it's really helped him. So I need to follow up with her because having muscle cramps and spasms at night is not fun. And I told him you don't need to be taking it every single day. And,
right. Because like you said, if you decrease the inflammation, you bring up a really good point that I want to double down on. You're not saying that these supplements are curing things. And we're never saying that even in naturopathic medicine. We're not applying a pill to a condition. We're helping bring homeostasis back to the individual. You're driving the pathways that need to be driven that were maybe petering out, or you're supplying cofactors to get pathways humming again, which brings homeostasis. So you're treating the person in front of you, not the condition. Right. And that's a big differentiation that I don't think people understand. They always say like, well, will this work for this? And I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. I don't know you and what your specific homeostatic imbalance is. And that's what we're trying to do when you're really doing good naturopathic medicine. So it's not applying a pill for every ill. In this case, it's just a supplement. It's a whole different way of thinking about things.
Well, and homeostasis is never achieved.
Right.
Ever. It's a sound wave. It's doing this. Mm-hmm. So every millisecond every breath that you take literally can affect your biochemistry, and does. If I take a breath of the air that I have now, fine. If I take a breath and someone's doing those damn scented dryer sheets, that's affecting my biochemistry. Yeah. Formaldehyde from, clothing or fragrances from perfumes, so you are never in total homeostasis. It's always in motion, and you have to be aware. So many people say, well, how much do I take? That's the question, because they are drilled, by influencers in TV and their doctors. Take this, suggested use is 2 capsules. I'll see you in 3 months.
Yep. What's the dose, doc? I'm like, it depends.
Yeah, it depends. It depends every single day. And thankfully, I've taught in my entire family, all 3 of my boys to tune in. How are you feeling this morning? Hey, bud, I got one left at home. The other two are in college. How are you feeling today? You want some supplements? He stops. He pauses. Yeah, I'll take a focus. I'll take an energy and nutrients. Well, would you rather just have the new electrolyte? Because it's got the ATP in it too. Yeah, I got time. Let's do the electrolyte. I won't take the energy and nutrients. So he stops. He literally thinks, how am I feeling? What's the result going to be after I take this? Yes, I want this. No, I don't want that.
Amen. That's it. I open my cabinet, I assess what I got, and I decide what I'm going to do that day based on how I'm feeling. And I always would joke with my patients, like, if I could live with you, I could dose you appropriately. But since I don't, I can't, and
Right.
and it varies from season to season. It varies on your stress levels. It varies on if you just got whomped with some virus. It varies.
Based on your cycle.
Yep. And it varies on all the other things you're doing or not doing. And that's really the answer when people, I am constantly hounded about things like, what's the dose? I'm like, I don't know. It really depends. And you have to address the individual in front of you. And the individual in front of you has to be very in tune with what's going on inside their body. People check out from that and they can't. I get it. When you feel, I've been really sick before. And when you feel really, really, really shitty, you don't know which way's up. You don't know if you feel bad or worse, and that's why it's imperative that you do all what we call all the things: the strength training, the sunlight, the good nutrition, the stress reduction, whatever that looks like for you, the spirituality, whatever all of those pieces are, those need to be addressed because that cleans up the playing field. So we get a better idea of when we are applying therapeutics, how's it sticking? Is this a side effect or is this just your shitty living?
Yeah, let me drive this point home by a case that was presented to me by a good buddy of mine from the UK. He did a lot of consulting with people, and he had a friend of his who was a very good athlete, very fit, in his 30s or early 40s, and ate well, and one day had a heart attack.
Oh no.
And he was like, what the hell's going on here? And so my buddy loves biomonitoring. So put a heart monitor on him. And so looked at sympathetic HRV and parasympathetic and all that. And he asked him, he said, what do you love in your life? Oh, I love exercise. I love my wife. I love my kids. I love my work. And he goes, well, what stresses you out? Oh, traffic, but I don't really get in traffic that much. So he couldn't really find a stressor. He's like, so then he came back and said, my buddy had an app that would read his HRV and his heart rate monitors. And he said, well, something's stressing you out because you're fine. And then your HRV just goes bang down. And then he goes, well, I don't know what's going on. And he goes, well, what happened this day? He thought about it, opened his calendar. It's like, oh, I hosted some friends over on that day. We'd like to barbecue. And he goes, okay, well, what happened on this day? Oh, I hosted some other people. And yeah, we cooked a lot of this. And it's like, hosting is stressing you out. Gathering with a bunch of people is stressing you out. No, dude, look.
Stresses me out.
Yeah.
I can relate to that.
Wow. So sometimes you are in denial. Maybe your significant other says that you enjoy it and other people are smiling around you and you enjoy that. But you don't want to be there,
Yeah.
but you put the face on. And so that is something. So HRV monitoring, the Oura ring, I don't wear anymore. In fact, I don't wear any jewelry, including a wedding ring. I just don't like stuff on my hands. But yeah, monitoring is pretty useful. When I did the Oura ring, it was actually really insightful. But after a certain point, I learned what triggered me and I learned what didn't. So then I was like, I don't need to keep monitoring because now I know that, I can't be watching Netflix movies in bed anymore. So
Yep.
I stopped doing it.
The Aura Ring is it's a pretty good, honest look at things. I finally put one on my husband's finger last Christmas because I was like, look, dude, you got to see the reality of your actions to some degree.
Yeah.
And it's sobering. I think it's a nice tool to kind of get people started. I also don't wear anything. I don't like jewelry either. And I don't wear it anymore. I'll wear it at night sometimes when I'm wondering. But man, stressors will get you. And it's crazy what stresses you out. It's also crazy what might invigorate you too. I have a similar story, except opposite. I'm a hermit. I will isolate and isolate and isolate because I live out in the country. I don't really have a lot of friends around here. I don't have a lot of friends in Oregon, period. And when I get together with people, while I preemptively feel stress and like my CGM will spike with cortisol, once I get there, my HRV is like, especially when I'm teaching in front of a group of people and I'm sharing my passion and my purpose, my HRV will go way up in such a great range. And I realize like, oh, I need to spend more time with people. I am isolated too often. And so there's just these variances that I don't think we really, but I really don't like I call it peopling. I'm not a fan of peopling. I don't like being in crowds. I don't like being in groups. But I do feel invigorated, and maybe it's just me being able to, speak my truth, and that helps, open that throat chakra up and speak my truth, which I feel like you and I both really got suppressed a lot in the last few years, which I think was probably pretty damaging to our health. Yeah, being as we're both we both love to teach, so
love to teach, love to help. Yeah, that was heinous. Still is heinous. Yeah,
it's wild. Yeah, we need some kind of we need some kind of support group. People don't even believe us when we try to explain it. Even when it was happening in real time, my friends that it was not happening to, because they weren't saying anything that would get them in trouble, they were like, oh, a lot of people didn't really believe me. A few people did. My podcast producer believed me, and a few people close to me believed me, but it was almost like even at times I felt like my husband thought I was overblowing it. And I was like, being on the receiving end of the censorship industrial complex was a wild experience.
It just made you want to say more.
Yes. Yeah. What is that with us? What is it? I've kind of given up on trying to figure out why some people could see the truth and some couldn't, but more so like, what was it about us that just, I saw it in your eyes when you would speak on Instagram. I saw you doing the same thing I was doing, like speaking in code, holding your tongue, and just this overwhelming urge to have the truth come out of your mouth. And why are we, what's the genetic variant there?
Well, I mean, we're both health professionals. We both are naturopathic health professionals. We both love to serve and help people, and we know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And we know that if we can get the information out, we can help a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so we chose a profession to help people. We learned the tools to help people, and then we can't help people. Mm-hmm. It's like, fucking serious? So yeah, it's maddening. But yeah, we better transition so we don't say anything stupid.
It's okay. It's the podcast. We'll just delete out anything bad for YouTube because they don't like me. I've been marked over there too. It's like that. They were like on to me. Okay. So this helps.
But one thing I'll say about what it is that we're saying, code again. So people with APOE4 struggle the most from that infection and the severity. I mean, there's research papers actually on it. So if you had that infection and have an APOE4 allele, you struggle the most because that particular virus binds to the acetylcholine receptor, blocks it from binding actually acetylcholine. And so people struggle with memory and brain fog, and it's a very persistent problem that people are experiencing still today. So you need to support healthy acetylcholine levels in order to get your brain back. And you need to overwhelm the brain with sufficient acetylcholine so it actually has an opportunity to dock to the acetylcholine receptor over the infection.
Yes.
And once you do that, and that infection also increases inflammation. Mm-hmm. So here you are reduced in acetylcholine. Then you get the infection, which causes inflammation, which reduces your acetylcholine even more, which predisposes you to further brain fog and further memory problems and further dementia problems. And you just feel stupid. And you're like, how in the hell am I going to get out of this? Well, you support healthy acetylcholine levels, optimal focus. And it's when it's taken by the right person, and it's not for everyone. When it's taken for the right person, like that guy said, avail lifts. Like my youngest son, he calls it his genius pill. The kid who vapes and has coughing problems now, and his mom is all paranoid. So I sent him bottles of optimal focus and dopamine nutrients, because vaping can be supportive of dopamine level. Not supportive. That's a horrible word for vaping. Vaping increases dopamine levels and acetylcholine levels. And so if you support healthy acetylcholine levels and dopamine levels in an individual who is addicted to nicotine or vaping or Zins or whatever, then their desire for doing that horrible habit goes away. And so I just I got a DM today from a lady on Instagram saying, my husband is using Zins nonstop and all of his buddies. How do I save these men? Something to that effect. And I sent her a screenshot of my text back and forth with this 20-year-old boy who was also vaping. And I asked him point blank, I said, so you taking the optimal focus? And he goes, yeah. I said, are you still vaping? He goes, yeah, sometimes. I was like, dude. And I said, so the focus isn't helping you then? He goes, oh, it helps if I take 3. It's like, well, that's the serving size, you idiot. Not everybody needs 3. You do. And so keep taking 3. That was like a month ago. I need to follow up with him again today, see how he's doing on it. But, it just wrecks your lungs.
It's terrible. Vaping is, I smoked for over a decade, Ben, for real, from 14 to 24. I chain smoked cigarettes.
Because you shared that you had the ADHD.
Yeah. So nicotine kept me on the straight and up, and I'll even use nicotine gum every once in a while at very, very low doses. But there's, again, these kids are getting into self-treating. They're finding things that work for them to balance their brain chemistry out and make them feel better. But there are other options available that are not.
Well, and they feel so much pressure by their parents to succeed in school and succeed in sports. I mean, so many of my kids' friends are being pushed by their parents to go to Division I schools to do their sports, so they get school paid for, and their bodies are falling apart, and they just don't rest. And it's unfortunate that the diagnosis codes change from ADHD and ADD to everything ADHD. I forget the 3 types. There's mixed, there's stimulatory, and like, non-stimulatory, of where it's slowed down. It's like, why don't you just keep calling it ADD then? So ADD types, acetylcholine does not help at all. In fact, it will make it worse. You need dopamine for that. So people who have ADD and they take optimal focus, they're like, that didn't work. I was like, yeah, because you calm down an already too calm of a brain. You need stimulation. You need norepinephrine. You need dopamine. So dopamine nutrients, especially combined with the brain nutrients, that will support healthy dopamine levels, and your brain will actually turn on. And so that's what one of my sons does at his college now. And the other son, one time he told me, he's like, I called him up. He's like, Dad, I've been studying for like 9 hours straight. And I said, well, what'd you take? He goes, I took the brain, the dopamine, the focus, and the serotonin. I was like, damn.
That's the infinity pill.
Yeah. And I was like, so do you have a headache? And he goes, yeah, a little one. I was like, yeah, I bet.
That's amazing. Yeah. You just gave everybody the secret formula there for super steady. I would have loved having that in high school and college. Yeah. It's really amazing, and it's nuanced, and it's different for each person. And something I really like about you when you talk about any of these things is you're very much like me, slow and low. Everything slow and low. Start slow and low. I dose pharmaceuticals that way with patients. I dose supplements that way. Slow and low, see how it hits you. And then you made a good mention with this kid, like he needed 3. So you got to titrate up to where your symptoms start to resolve. And that's really the beauty of dosing. This is why I hate it when people ask me what's the dose on anything.
Yeah, and then sometimes I got a question yesterday on my website at Seeking Health. We have a product Q&A there, people looking at a particular supplement. We just added a Q&A features because I don't want people buying the wrong supplement. And so if you have a question, ask. And this lady goes, I've been taking your hydroxyl B12 with folinic acid to support my energy levels, and I'm still tired, and I'm taking 4. So well, how much more do I need to take? I was like, well, fatigue is pretty comprehensive. There's a lot going on with
Yeah.
fatigue. So it might not be a folate and B12 issue. It could be a lot of other issues. So I can't really help you. But I mean, we do at this point know it's probably not a B12 or folate deficiency. It's something else.
Yes, good point.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, this has been so fun. I really love talking to you. I hope you'll come back on the show because there's so many more things I think we could uncover here.
For sure.
I've got a giant rescue. I don't know if you see his ears. I've got this.
I see his ears.
This is my rescue German Shepherd, and he's telling me we got to go outside. So I got to take him out before he starts.
My rescue's over there, passed out.
Mine comes up and starts knocking everything off my table with his tail.
Yeah, well, you better get him out.
He's a beast. Yeah. Well, so fun. Let everyone know where they can find you. And again, your supplement company, your Instagram, everything.
Yeah. I'm on Instagram, kind of. At Dr. Ben Lynch, and then company is seekinghealth.com, like looking for health. And those are primary places you can find me on YouTube as well. And then that shadow band is somewhat lifting on YouTube. That was the longest one. I think I'm lifted on Meta a little bit more than I was, but yeah, that's where you could be. And then the book Dirty Genes, that's the place to start. So
yes,
I'd much rather
the book.
Read the book Dirty Genes, especially if you're scared about MTHFR or you're just scared about genetics in general. It's actually an empowering book. It's not a scary book. There is science in it, yes, but at the end of the day, you got to learn some science to learn how to take care of yourself. And that's a very powerful tool to help you to learn how to take care of yourself. So start with the book, Dirty Genes.
Amen. We will put all the links in the show notes. Yeah, that's a great book. And I refer people to it all the time because I think it's well written, it's easy to follow, and you do give enough of the science for people to, doctors and health professionals can nerd out on it while the general public, I think it gives them a nice place to start. So yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today, Ben, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Tyna Show. Please be sure to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Tyna, that's DRTYNA, and Dr. Tyna 2.0, as well as visit my website at drtyna.com. This is a Resonant Media production produced by Drake Peterson and mixed by Chris McCone. The theme song is by John the Guilt. As always, you can email the show at podcast@drtyna.com. And if you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. See you next week. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practices of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is intended not to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.